Welcome to Midnight Whispers, the place where the far north breathes secrets into the dark. Tonight we're in Alaska, a place of ice roads, mountain shadows, and skies that flicker like ghostly fires. Here, legends aren't just old tales, they're warnings carved into the land. Every story you'll hear tonight comes from true events, local myths, and first-hand encounters. Before we start, subscribe and tap the bell so you don't miss the next time the night moves. Wrap yourself in something warm. Out there in the dark, a sound is already moving closer. Let's begin. Story 1. Residue. I woke up 3 days ago in my childhood bedroom in Anchorage, Alaska, and I have no memory of the last 42 years of my life. According to my driver, yes, license, I am 45 years old. My name is Michael Hendricks. I have a wife named Sarah, 2 teenage daughters, and I work as an insurance adjuster in Seattle. But when I look in the mirror, I see a stranger. When I try to remember my wedding day, my children being born, my entire adult life, there is nothing. Just a smooth black emptiness where 4 decades should be. The last thing I actually remember is being 7 years old, lying in bed in my parents' house on Muldoon Road in Anchorage, listening to my mother read me a bedtime story. That was March 14th, 1983, the night of the blackout. The night 17 people vanished from their homes and were never found. I was supposed to be one of them. But somehow, I am still here. The police think I am having a mental breakdown. My wife thinks I need psychiatric help. My daughters are terrified of me because I do not recognize them and keep calling them by the wrong names. But I know what I know. I am 7 years old. I should be in 2nd grade. Ronald Reagan should be president. The internet should not exist. And I should not have this adult body with its scars and calluses and evidence of a life I never lived. Something happened during that blackout. Something took those 17 people. And I think it tried to take me too, but failed somehow. And now, 42 years later, I am waking up in a future I was never supposed to see, trapped in a body that grew old without me inside it. Let me tell you what I remember from that night. The real night, not the false memories or the gaps. My mother had just finished reading me a chapter from a book about a boy detective. She kissed my forehead, turned off the lamp, and left my door cracked open the way I liked it, so a strip of hallway light could keep the darkness from getting too complete. I remember the sound of the television downstairs, my father watching the news. I remember the hum of the refrigerator, the ticking of the heating system, all the ordinary sounds of a house at night. Then the power went out. Not gradually, but all at once, like someone had thrown a switch. The strip of light from the hallway vanished. The hum of the refrigerator stopped. The house became completely silent in a way that felt wrong, unnatural. Even the background noise of the city, the distant traffic and the wind, seemed to disappear. I lay in my bed, waiting for my parents to call out, to turn on flashlights, to explain what had happened. But the house stayed silent. Minutes passed, maybe longer. Time felt strange, elastic, like I was underwater. Then I heard the tapping at my window, soft at first, like fingernails on glass. My bedroom was on the 2nd floor. Nothing should have been able to reach my window. But the tapping continued, getting louder, more insistent. And underneath it, I heard something else. A wet, sliding sound, like something large and slick moving across the siding of the house. I wanted to call for my parents, but my voice would not work. I wanted to hide under my blankets, but my body would not move. I could only lie there, frozen, listening to whatever was outside my window trying to get in. The tapping stopped. For a moment, there was nothing. Then I heard the window slide open. I had never opened that window. It was painted shut, had been since before we moved into the house. But I heard it opening anyway. The old wood scraping, cold air rushing into my room. Something came through the window. I could not see it in the darkness, but I could hear it. Heavy, wet breathing, the creak of my floorboards under weight, and a smell, thick and chemical, like motor oil mixed with something organic and rotting. It moved toward my bed. I felt the mattress shift as something pressed down on the edge. And then I felt fingers, cold and slick, touching my face, running across my forehead, my cheeks, my lips, as if memorizing the shape of me. That is when I screamed, or tried to. The sound that came out of my mouth was not my voice. It was deeper, older, wrong, and the moment I made that sound, whatever was touching me recoiled. I heard it scramble back across the room, heard my window slam shut, heard that wet sliding sound receding down the side of the house. The power came back on. Light flooded my room. My parents burst through the door, asking if I was okay, if I had a nightmare. I tried to tell them something had been in my room. Something had touched me. They checked the window. It was locked, painted shut, impossible to open. They said I had a bad dream. They said the blackout had scared me. They stayed with me until I fell asleep. In the morning, the news reported that 17 people had vanished during the blackout. Entire families gone from locked houses. No signs of forced entry. No sounds reported by neighbors. The only evidence was a strange greasy residue found on the windowsills of the empty rooms. The police investigated for months. They never found the missing people. Eventually, it became one of those unsolved mysteries that people in Anchorage talked about in whispers, a piece of local urban legend. My parents never mentioned finding any residue in my room. But I remember, years later, my mother scrubbing my windowsill over and over with bleach and ammonia, crying the whole time, refusing to explain why. Now I am 45 years old, and I do not remember growing up. I do not remember high school or college or getting married or having children. There are photographs, documents, proof that I lived those years. But they feel like they belong to someone else, like I am looking at the life of a stranger who happens to have my name in my face. 3 days ago, I woke up in a hotel room in Seattle. According to the hotel staff, I had checked in alone the previous evening and requested an early wake-up call. But I have no memory of it. The last thing I remember is being 7 years old in my childhood bedroom in Anchorage. I found things in my suitcase that I do not recognize. A laptop computer that I apparently know how to use, even though I have no memory of learning. A cell phone with contacts and messages from people I should know but do not. Photographs of a woman and 2 teenage girls who are supposed to be my family. I called the number saved under wife. The woman who answered sounded exhausted and worried. She said I had left home 4 days ago without explanation, had not been returning her calls. She begged me to tell her where I was, to come home, to get help. She said I had been acting strange for weeks, forgetting things, seeming confused about basic details of our life together. I asked her when we met. She said we met in college in 1998. I asked her to describe our wedding. She gave me details that I have no memory of experiencing. I asked her our daughters' names. She started crying and asked what was wrong with me, why I was doing this. I hung up. I do not know that woman. I was never in college. I am 7 years old, and something happened to me during the Anchorage Blackout that nobody can explain. I drove to Anchorage. It took me 3 days, and the entire drive felt like moving through a dream. The world is wrong. The cars are wrong. The technology is wrong. Everything has changed, aged, moved forward while I stayed frozen in 1983. My childhood home still stands on Muldoon Road, though it looks smaller and more worn than I remember. A different family lives there now. I parked across the street and watched it for hours, trying to reconcile my memories with this present reality. Then I went to the library and searched newspaper archives. I found articles about the 1983 blackout, the vanishings, the investigation. And I found something else, a follow-up article from 1995, reporting that one of the missing people had been found. A woman named Patricia Delgado, who had disappeared from her home during the blackout at age 34. She walked into an Anchorage police station 12 years later, confused and disoriented, claiming to have no memory of the intervening years. She remembered going to bed the night of the blackout and then waking up in the body of a 46-year-old woman. The article said she was evaluated by psychiatrists and eventually committed to a mental health facility. She insisted until her death in 2003 that she had never lived those missing 12 years, that something had taken her during the blackout and only recently released her. I searched for more. I found 2 other cases, mentioned only in passing in obscure local forums and archived blog posts. A man who reappeared in 2007, claiming to have no memory of the 24 years since the blackout. Another woman who showed up in 2014, insisting she was still 13 years old despite being in a 51-year-old body. They all told the same story. They went to sleep the night of the blackout. Something came to their windows. They woke up decades later, with no memory of the intervening time, trapped in aged bodies that did not feel like their own. And I found something else in my research. Records from the nights of all those reappearances. On the night Patricia Delgado returned, there was a power outage in her neighborhood that lasted exactly 17 minutes. On the night the man returned in 2007, there was a blackout that affected his entire section of the city. Same for the woman in 2014. Whatever took us during the original blackout has been bringing us back, one at a time, during smaller blackouts over the years. returning us to bodies that have lived entire lives we do not remember. Lives that do not feel real because we were not in them. Something else was living in these bodies, pretending to be us, creating false histories and false relationships. I went back to my old house after dark. I parked down the street and watched the windows. The family that lives there now was eating dinner, normal and mundane. Then the power went out. Not just their house, the entire street went dark. I saw movement at the second floor window. My old bedroom window. Something was climbing up the side of the house. Something large and dark that moved wrong, like it had too many joints or not enough bones. It reached the window and pressed against the glass. I do not know if it was trying to get in or trying to get out. I do not know if it was coming for someone inside or if it was checking on me, making sure I was still here, still following the pattern. The power came back on after 17 minutes. The thing was gone. But when I walked up to the house later, after the family had gone to bed, I found that greasy residue on the windowsill. The same residue the police found in 1983. I think I understand now what happened to me. To all of us. Something came during the blackout and took 17 people. But it did not just take us. It replaced us. It put something else in our bodies. Something that could walk and talk and live as us while our real selves were somewhere else. Somewhere dark and cold and timeless. And every few years, when the conditions are right, when there is another blackout, it swaps us back. The thing that was living as us goes back to wherever it came from. And we wake up in bodies that have aged without us, surrounded by lives we never lived. I have been back in my body for 3 days. That means something else was living as me for 42 years. It married a woman I do not know. It raised children I do not remember conceiving. It built a career and a life in relationships that feel like fiction to me. And somewhere out there, that thing is in the dark again, waiting for the next blackout so it can come back and take my place again. I do not know what to do. I cannot go back to Seattle. To that wife and those daughters who think they know me. I cannot pretend to be someone I am not. But I also cannot explain this to anyone without sounding insane. Last night, I checked into a motel on the outskirts of Anchorage. I woke up this morning to find greasy residue on my windowsill. I did not hear anything during the night. There was no blackout, but it was there anyway, that familiar chemical smell, that evidence of something visiting. I think it is watching me, waiting to see what I will do. Waiting to see if I will figure out the truth or if I will break like the others did, end up committed and medicated and dismissed. I am writing this down because I need someone to know what really happened in Anchorage in 1983. 17 people were taken. Some of us came back, but we came back wrong. Displaced in time. Strangers in our own lives. And the things that took our places are still out there, still waiting for the next blackout, the next opportunity to walk among us. If you are listening to this, check your windowsills tonight. Check for that greasy residue. Because if you find it, you will know they have been watching you. And during the next blackout, they might decide it is your turn. Story 2. Current that runs backward. I drowned in the Yukon River 3 weeks ago, and somehow I'm still here to tell you about it. That is not a metaphor. I went under, felt my lungs fill with ice-cold water, felt everything go dark, felt myself die, but then I woke up on the riverbank, soaked and freezing, with no explanation for how I got there. And ever since that moment, I've been seeing things that haven't happened yet. Or maybe things that happened 120 years ago. I honestly can't tell anymore. My name is Tom Harrington. I am a fishing guide from Fairbanks, 42 years old, divorced, no kids. I've spent the last 15 years taking tourists up and down Alaska, its rivers, showing them how to catch salmon and trout, telling them stories about the gold rush days. Standard stuff, safe stuff, the kind of work where the biggest danger is a client hooking their own thumb or falling out of a boat. Until 3 weeks ago, I thought I knew the Yukon River better than anyone. I'd run that stretch near Eagle 100 times. Knew every bend, every sandbar, every place where the current got tricky. The Yukon is powerful. Yeah, but it is predictable. It flows northwest toward the Bering Sea at a steady 3 to 5 miles per hour. Always has, always will, except when it doesn't. The locals around Eagle have stories about a phantom current. They call it the ghost current, and they've been talking about it since before Alaska was a state. According to the old-timers, there is a section of the river near the abandoned trading post where the water sometimes flows backward. Not swirling in an eddy, not caught in some normal hydraulic effect, actually flowing upstream against every law of physics and hydrology, like someone hit rewind on reality itself. I always figured it was just river legend, the kind of story guides tell tourists to make the trip more interesting. Yeah, sometimes there are weird currents near Eagle. The bedrock creates unusual flow patterns. But water flowing upriver? Come on, that is not how rivers work. Then I saw it with my own eyes. It happened on a Tuesday afternoon in late September. I was heading back to Eagle after dropping off a client downstream. Solo run, just me and my aluminum drift boat and 6 miles of river. The sun was low, painting everything in that golden autumn light that makes Alaska look like a postcard. Perfect conditions, easy water. I noticed the current change about 2 miles from Eagle. It was subtle at first. My boat started slowing down even though I hadn't to touch the oars. Then it stopped completely, just sitting in the middle of the river like I hit a submerged log. But there was nothing there, just clear, dark water flowing around me. Then the boat started moving backward. Not drifting, not spinning, moving backward, upstream, against the current I could still see flowing normally on either side of me. It was like I entered a corridor of water that didn't follow the same rules as the rest of the river. I tried rowing against it, putting my full weight into the oars, but it didn't matter. The backward current was stronger than anything I could generate. I looked down into the water, trying to understand what was happening. The river near Eagle is usually murky, full of glacial silt that makes it impossible to see more than a few inches below the surface. But in this current, the water was clear, crystal clear. I could see straight down to the rocky bottom 30 feet below. And I could see something else. There were shapes down there. Human shapes, dozens of them, standing on the riverbed like they were walking along a street, completely unbothered by the fact that they were underwater. They wore old-fashioned clothes, heavy coats and hats, the kind of gear gold prospectors wore during the Klondike Rush. I blinked, convinced I was seeing things. Some trick of the light, some optical illusion created by the clear water and the low sun. But when I looked again, they were still there. More of them now. A whole crowd of people walking along the bottom of the Yukon River, heading upstream just like my boat. Then I looked at the shore. The abandoned trading post at Eagle was gone. In its place was a bustling settlement. Tents and rough wooden buildings. Smoke rising from dozens of campfires. People everywhere. Hundreds of them, swarming along the riverbank like ants. I could see them clearly, could make out individual faces, could see the desperation in their movements as they hauled equipment and argued and set up camps. It was Eagle during the gold rush. Eagle from 1898. And it wasn't a vision or a hallucination. It was real. I was looking at the past, somehow pulled into it by this impossible current. The boat picked up speed. I was moving backward faster now, upstream at what felt like 10 or 15 miles per hour. The water around me started to get rough, whitecaps forming even though there was no wind. I could hear sounds now, voices, laughter, the ring of hammers on metal, dogs barking, all of it coming from the shore, from the gold rush settlement that shouldn't exist. I tried to steer toward the bank, to get out of this current and back to normal water. The oars might as well have been twigs. I had no control. The boat was locked into whatever path this backward flowing water wanted to take me. That is when I saw the whirlpool. It formed about 50 yards ahead of me. A spinning vortex of clear water that went down and down and down, deeper than should have been possible. I could see the people at the bottom of the river getting pulled toward it, their old-fashioned clothes billowing as they were sucked into the spinning water. Some of them looked up at me as they passed. Their faces were calm, accepting, like they'd been expecting this. I grabbed the sides of the boat and held on. The whirlpool caught me a few seconds later. The boat tilted, spun, and I felt myself sliding across the wet aluminum floor toward the water. I tried to brace myself, tried to find something to hold on to, but everything was too slippery, too unstable. I went over the side. The cold hit me like a physical blow. The Yukon in September is maybe 40 degrees. Cold enough to stop your heart if you were not prepared. I wasn't too prepared. I gasped involuntarily, and water rushed into my mouth, my throat, my lungs. I tried to swim, but I couldn't tell which way was up. The whirlpool had me, spinning me around like I weighed nothing. I saw things as I spun. Fragments of scenes playing out around me in the clear water. Gold prospectors panning for nuggets in streams that didn't exist anymore. Women hanging laundry in camps that had been gone for over a century. Dogs pulling sleds through snow that had melted decades ago. All of it happening simultaneously, all around me, like I was caught in a river that flowed through time instead of space. Then I saw myself, Not a reflection, not a hallucination. I saw myself standing on the riverbank in my modern clothes, looking out at the water, watching my own boat get pulled into the whirlpool, watching myself go over the side. I was simultaneously drowning in the river and standing on the shore, observer and victim at the same time. The me on the shore started walking into the water, just wading in, fully clothed, calm as anything, walking toward where I was drowning. I tried to scream, to warn myself, but my lungs were full of water. I could only watch as the other me disappeared beneath the surface. Then everything went black. I woke up on the riverbank with no memory of how I got there. My boat was beached next to me, undamaged. My gear was still secured in the storage compartments. It was like nothing had happened, except my clothes were soaked, and when I checked my watch, 3 hours had passed. 3 hours I couldn't account for. I should have gone straight to the hospital, should have reported the incident, should have done a lot of things. Instead, I went home, changed into dry clothes, and tried to convince myself it had been a close call with a normal current. A whirlpool caused by unusual flow patterns. Nothing supernatural, nothing impossible. That worked for about 2 days. Then I started seeing the past. It began with small things. I'd be driving through Fairbanks and suddenly see a street that didn't exist. Buildings from the 1920s appearing between modern storefronts. I'd blink and they'd be gone. Just flashes. Moments of overlap between then and now. I figured it was stress. Trauma. My brain processing the near-drowning experience in weird ways. But the visions got stronger. Longer. More detailed. I started seeing whole scenes play out. I'd be in the grocery store and suddenly I'd be in a trading post from the gold rush era, surrounded by prospectors buying supplies. I'd be in my apartment and find myself in a canvas tent, watching men play cards by lamplight. The past was bleeding through into my present, and I couldn't control it. Worse, I started recognizing people. There was a man I kept seeing, tall, lean, with a thick beard and eyes that looked haunted. He appeared in multiple visions, always doing the same thing, walking toward the Yukon River, just walking with this determined, desperate expression. In every vision, he reached the riverbank and wade in, fully clothed, and disappear beneath the surface. After seeing him maybe a dozen times, I realized where I recognized him from. There was a historical photograph in the Eagle Museum, a group of prospectors from 1898, and he was in it, standing in the back row, same beard, same haunted eyes. The caption identified him as James Corrigan, a miner from Seattle who had gone missing during the rush. Presumed drowned in the Yukon. But he hadn't drowned. Not accidentally. He walked into the river on purpose. And somehow, across more than a century of time, I was seeing it happen over and over again. I needed answers. I drove back to Eagle, back to the spot where I'd gone into the water. The trading post ruins were still there, abandoned and overgrown like always. The river flowed normally, northwest toward the sea. No sign of any backward current. But I could feel it. Some residual effect, like the air was thicker there, like reality was thinner. I talked to the few year-round residents of Eagle, asked if anyone knew about the ghost current. Most people acted like I was crazy or drunk, but one old woman, must have been in her 80s, nodded when I mentioned it. She told me her grandfather had been caught in it back in the 1940s. He survived, just like me, but he'd never been right afterward. Spent the rest of his life seeing things that weren't there. Talking to people who had been dead for decades. He told her the current was a rip in time, a place where the river had gotten confused and started flowing backward through history instead of forward through space. She told me her grandfather eventually went back to the river, walked in one day and never came out. They found his body 3 weeks later, miles downstream. But according to the autopsy, he drowned 3 days before they found him. His body had been in the water for 3 days. But witnesses had seen him alive and walking around Eagle for 2 weeks after he went in. Time had gotten scrambled. Cause and effect had stopped making sense. That's when I understood what was happening to me. I hadn't survived the whirlpool. Not really. Some version of me had drowned in that backward flowing current, and some other version had crawled out onto the shore. But I wasn't wholly in one timeline anymore. I was split between the present and the past, between now and then, between alive and dead. The visions got worse after I figured it out. They lasted longer, became more immersive. I'd lose hours to them, whole days sometimes. I'd blink and find myself in the gold rush era, living through someone else, memories. A prospector panning for gold. A woman cooking over a campfire. A dog sled driver pushing through a blizzard. I was experiencing the past as if I'd been there, as if I'd lived those lives. And through it all, I kept seeing James Corrigan, walking to the river, wading in, disappearing, over and over and over, like he was stuck in a loop, trapped in the moment of his death, unable to move forward or back. I realized I was seeing my own future. The ghost current doesn't just flow backward through space. It flows backward through time. And anyone caught in it becomes part of that backward flow. James Corrigan hadn't just drowned in 1898. He was still drowning, continuously, his death stretched out across more than a century. And I was going to join him. Was already joining him. The visions weren't to memories of the past. They were previews of my own trapped existence. I tried to fight it, tried to stay away from the river, tried to anchor myself in the present with routines and schedules and anything that felt concrete and real. It didn't work. The pull was too strong. Every day, I felt more drawn to Eagle, to that spot where the current had caught me. It was like gravity, like magnetism, like destiny. Last week, I drove back to Eagle. I didn't want to. My conscious mind was screaming at me to turn around, to go anywhere else. But my body wasn't listening. I was on autopilot, following a path that had already been carved out for me over a century ago. I parked near the old trading post ruins, walked down to the riverbank. The water was normal, no backward current, no whirlpool, just the Yukon flowing northwest like it had for millennia. But I could see it underneath, the ghost river, the one that flowed through time instead of space. It was there, waiting, just below the surface of normal reality. I waded in. The water was cold, so cold it burned. I kept walking, feeling the current catch me, feeling myself being pulled under and backward and away from everything I'd ever known. I saw James Corrigan ahead of me, still walking, still trying to reach something he'd lost. I saw dozens of others, hundreds maybe, all caught in the ghost current, all drowning forever in a moment that never ended. And I saw myself, standing on the shore, watching me wade in, about to follow, about to complete the loop, about to become the thing I'd been running from. That is when I understood the real horror. The ghost current doesn't just show you the past. It makes you part of it. Everyone who drowns in that backward flowing water becomes trapped in the moment of their death, living it over and over, visible to anyone else who gets caught in the current. We become the ghosts. We become the scenes that future victims will see playing out on the riverbank. I'm still in the river right now. Still drowning, still being pulled backward through time. But I am also here, somehow, writing this down, trying to warn anyone who might listen. The ghost current is real. It appears near Eagle every few years, a ribbon of water that flows upstream, pulling boats and people into a whirlpool that exists outside of normal time. If you ever on the Yukon near the old trading post, and you feel your boat start moving backward against the current, get to shore immediately. Don't to try to understand it. Don't to try to fight it. Just get out of the water as fast as you can, because once it catches you, not drowning for a few minutes. Drowning forever. Your death becomes a moment stretched across decades or centuries, played out over and over for anyone else unlucky enough to get caught in the current. I can see James Corrigan clearly now. He is right beside me, still walking into the river, still trying to reach whatever he thought he defined. And behind him are hundreds of others, gold prospectors and fishermen and guides and tourists. All of us trapped in the ghost current. All of us drowning in a river that flows the wrong way through time. I don't know how much longer I can maintain this connection to the present. The past is pulling harder now. Soon I'll just be another ghost scene playing out on the riverbank near Eagle. Another prospector from the gold rush walking into the water. Another victim of the current that runs backward. If you see me there, Dawn, to try to help. You can. I'm already gone. Have been gone for 3 weeks, even though I'm still here writing this. Time doesn't work right in the ghost current. Cause and effect get scrambled. You can be dead and alive simultaneously, drowning and breathing, past and present. The Yukon River near Eagle looks normal most of the time, but underneath the surface, beneath the regular northwest flow, there is another current. An older one that flows backward through the years, collecting souls like driftwood, trapping them in moments they can escape. And I am one of them now, forever walking into the water, forever seeing my own future self following me in, forever caught in a loop that has no beginning and no end. The ghost current is patient. It has been there for longer than anyone knows. It will be there long after everyone reading this is gone. Waiting for the next person to get pulled under. Waiting to add another ghost to its collection. Waiting to show them scenes from the past that are actually scenes from their own trapped future. Dawn, to go to Eagle when the current runs backward. Dawn, to let it catch you. Dawn, to become like me. Because once you in the ghost current, you never really leave. You just keep drowning forever in a river that flows the wrong way through time, watching yourself die over and over and over again. And there is nothing anyone can do to pull you out. Story 3. Sourdough is the last claim I found the prospector's journal 3 days before I disappeared from the world I knew. That leather-bound book, stained dark with what I hoped was just old coffee, contained words that made my blood run cold even in the Nevada desert heat. The mummified corpse still clutched it against his chest, his dried fingers locked around it like tree roots around a stone. His final entry haunts me. It wants a body to feel the sun again. I will not give it mine. I should have left it there. Should have called the Rangers, reported the body, driven away. But I read every word, and now I understand why he chose death over what was offered to him. My name doesn't matter anymore. I was just another weekend prospector with a metal detector and too much free time, exploring abandoned claims in the Mojave. The old-timers called these miners sourdoughs, men who lived on nothing but flour and hope while they searched for gold. This one had been dead maybe 60 years, preserved by the dry air in his ramshackle cabin 20 miles from the nearest paved road. The journal started normal enough. Thomas Brennan, 1963. He'd come out from Ohio after his wife died, chasing rumors of untapped veins in the mountains. Page after page detailed his methodical search. The loneliness eating at him, the desert playing tricks with his mind. Then, on July 15th, everything changed. He wrote about finding footprints made of loose gravel that reformed themselves each morning. About whispers in the wind that sounded like rocks grinding against each other. About waking to find his tools arranged in patterns that hurt to look at. I would have dismissed it as heat stroke, except I'd been experiencing the same thing since arriving at his claim. The first night after finding the body, I camped a mile away. Couldn't bring myself to sleep near that cabin. Around midnight, I heard it, the sound of gravel shifting, reforming, walking. My flashlight beam caught nothing but shadows that seemed to move wrong, edges that didn't quite match where they should be. In the morning, I found my camping gear rearranged. My water bottles formed a perfect circle. My boots pointed toward the mountains. My compass spun wildly, never settling on north. Thomas had written about the same experiences. He named the thing his partner, though the word dripped with bitter irony. According to his entries, it had emerged from an old mine shaft he'd been exploring, a thing of constantly shifting stones and what looked like bones from animals that never quite existed. It moved like an avalanche in slow motion, reforming itself with each step, leaving trails of gravel that spelled out messages in languages that predated human speech. It had led him to gold, real gold, veins of it spider webbing through quartz formations deep in the mountain. More wealth than a man could spend in 10 lifetimes. The thing asked for nothing in return, at first. It simply watched with eyes made of polished river stones while Thomas filled bag after bag with nuggets the size of walnuts. But everything has a price in the desert. The journal entries grew frantic as Thomas described the bargain. The creature had been trapped underground for countless centuries, bound to the deep places where sunlight never reached. It had once been something else, something that walked under open sky, but an ancient wrong had condemned it to exile in the earth's bowels. It could guide men to gold, feed off their greed and desperation, but it needed more. It needed flesh to wear, a body to inhabit, a way to feel warmth again. Thomas refused. Night after night, he wrote about the offers, gold beyond imagination, knowledge of every precious metal deposit within 1,000 miles, secrets of the earth that would revolutionize mining. All it wanted was to wear his skin, to use his bones as scaffolding for its gravel form, to peer through his eyes at the sun it hadn't seen since before the pyramids were built. I understood his refusal, but I also understood the temptation. My second night near the claim, the thing visited me. I woke to find it standing at the edge of my campfire light, a vaguely human shape made of constantly cascading pebbles and fragments of yellowed bone. Old bones, wrong bones, bones with too many joints, from creatures that shouldn't to exist. Its voice sounded like a rock slide happening in reverse, stones climbing upward against gravity. It showed me the gold, led me to a crevice Thomas hadn't found, where pure veins gleamed like frozen sunlight. I filled my pockets, my backpack, my truck, enough to pay off every debt, to never work again, to disappear into comfortable obscurity. The thing watched, patient as erosion, while I took and took and took. On the third night, it made its offer. The proposal was different than what Thomas described. Evolution, it called it. Not possession but partnership. It would merge with me, it explained. Create something new. I would keep my consciousness, enhanced by its ancient knowledge. My body would become malleable, able to shift between flesh and stone at will. Immortal, powerful, free to walk in both sunlight and the deep places of the earth. All I had to do was accept, to open myself, to let it in. Thomas had been weak, it insisted, frightened of transformation. But I was different. I had the hunger, the emptiness inside that called out to be filled. It could taste my desperation, my failed marriage, my dead-end job, my profound loneliness that echoed its own millennial isolation. I told it I needed time to think. One more day, that was 12 hours ago. I spent them reading his journal again, understanding now what he didn't to write directly. The others who came before him, the prospectors who vanished, the native tribes who marked this area as forbidden ground, the Spanish conquistadors who reported demons made of sand and bone, all offered the same bargain. Some accepted, and those who accepted became the whispers other travelers hear in the waste places, became the movement in peripheral vision, became the things that lead new souls to gold and damnation. Thomas, this final entry included a detail I missed the first time. He found another journal, older, from 1897. That prospector had also refused, and another from 1844, and another from 1761. Each one chose death over transformation, starvation over surrender. A chain of refusal stretching back to when this land was young. But the chain always breaks eventually. Someone always says yes. The sun sets in an hour. The thing will return with darkness, patient and eternal. I've written this account on pages torn from Thomas's journal, placing them where someone will find them. Maybe another weekend prospector. Maybe you. The gold sits heavy in my truck. 50 pounds of it. Enough to change everything. Enough to make the emptiness worth something. The keys are in my hand. I could drive away, never look back, pretend this was all desert madness. But I know what Thomas knew. It doesn't matter how far you run. Once they've taken the gold, once they heard the offer, the thing made of gravel and wrong bones becomes your shadow. It will follow, patient as geological time, until you weak enough, desperate enough, hollow enough to say yes. Or until you choose Thomas' way out. The mummified corpse still sits in that cabin, still clutching his journal. I moved him to his bed, closed his empty sockets, arranged his limbs in peaceful repose. He looks almost content, almost free. The bottle of whiskey and the revolver he placed beside him remain untouched. His final companions in refusal. I understand now why he wrote that last line. It wants a body to feel the sun again. I will not give it mine. Not defiance, not courage, just the simple arithmetic of salvation. Better to die human than live as something else. The sun touches the mountain peaks, painting them the color of old blood. My hands shake as I write these final words. Behind me, I can hear it approaching, gravel flowing uphill, bones clicking in rhythms that predate music. It knows my decision before I do. That left the gold in obvious sight. Whoever finds it will think they struck it rich. They'll take it, and the cycle will continue. Another soul, another offer, another choice between humanity and something infinitely worse. I'm sorry for that. But the gold always finds someone. That is its nature. That is its purpose. If you, rereading this, you've probably already taken some. You've probably already heard the whispers. You might even have seen the thing shifting at the edge of your vision, patient and eternal. You'll tell yourself it's not real, that I was insane, that Thomas was insane, that we all succumb to isolation and heat. Maybe you rewrite, maybe this is all delusion. But tonight, when you hear gravel moving against gravity, when you see shadows that don't match their sources, when something made of stone and ancient bone offers you everything you've ever wanted for the simple price of letting it feel the sun again, remember Thomas Brennan. Remember me. Remember all of us who chose the harder path. The transformation would be painless, it promises. I would become something greater, something that could walk between worlds, between states of being, neither fully human nor fully other, a bridge between the deep earth and the burning sky. All I have to do is say yes. The whiskey Thomas left tastes like liquid fire. The revolver is heavier than it should be. Outside, the gravel thing waits with geological patience, confident in the mathematics of human weakness. It has waited millennia. It can wait a few minutes more. But it won't have to wait much longer. Because they made my choice. And it's neither the one Thomas made nor the one the creature expects. I am going to walk out there. I am going to face it. And I am going to do what none of the others tried. I am going to take it with me. The revolver has 6 shots, 5 for it, formed of gravel and bone, to scatter its borrowed substance. And 1 for me, but only after they grabbed hold, only after they pulled it close, only after they ensured that when I fall, we fall together into whatever comes next. It wants a body to feel the sun again. It can have mine, for exactly as long as it takes both of us to leave this world behind. The sun vanishes. Darkness flows across the desert like spilled ink. Time to go. Story 4. Thing in the bore, the last thing I heard before the wave took my son was the sound of him laughing, and underneath that laughter, something else laughing back. My name is Tom Garrett, and I am 41 years old. I moved to Anchorage 3 years ago for work, bringing my 12-year-old son Jake with me after my divorce. We were supposed to start fresh in Alaska, build something new together. Instead, I watched him disappear into the muddy water of Turnagain Arm, pulled under by something that should not exist, something the locals warned me about, but I refused to believe. It happened 4 days ago. Jake and I drove down to Girdwood for the weekend, planning to do some hiking and maybe catch the tidal bore that surges up Turnagain Arm twice a day. The bore is a wall of water that rushes inland when the tide comes in, one of the largest in North America, moving at 15 miles per hour and reaching heights of 6 feet or more. Tourists love to photograph it. The locals know to keep their distance. We parked at a pullout along the Seward Highway around noon. The tide was out, and the arm looked more like a desert than a body of water. Miles of gray mud stretched before us, flat and desolate, broken only by channels of water that wound through the silt-like veins. The mud in Turnagain Arm is not like normal mud. It is glacial silt, fine as flour, and it acts like quicksand. People have died out there, stuck in the mud as the tide came in and drowned them. Jake wanted to get closer to the water, his edge. I should have said no. I should have remembered the stories I had heard at work, the warnings from coworkers who grew up here. But it was a beautiful day. The sun was shining, and my son was smiling for the first time in weeks. I let him walk down to the shore. The mud was firm at first, or seemed to be. We walked about 50 yards from the highway, boots crunching on the dried silt. Jake found a piece of driftwood and started poking at the mud, watching it ooze and ripple. I checked my watch. The bore was due in 20 minutes. That is when I noticed the smell, thick and organic, like rotting seaweed mixed with something chemical. It seemed to come from the mud itself, rising in waves that made my eyes water. Jake noticed it too and made a face, asking what it was. I told him it was probably just decomposing algae or something natural. But the smell kept getting stronger, more concentrated, as if something underneath the mud was exhaling. The first sound was distant, a low rumble that I felt in my chest before I heard it with my ears. The boar was coming. I grabbed Jake, his shoulder, and told him we needed to head back to higher ground. He wanted to stay and watch, but I insisted. We turned to walk back to the highway. That is when his foot sank. Not gradually, but all at once, like the mud had opened up beneath him. He went in past his ankle, then his calf, and when he tried to pull free, his other foot sank too. He looked at me with confusion rather than fear at first, like this was just an inconvenience, something we could fix together. I grabbed his arms and pulled. The mud held him tight, making sucking sounds as I tried to lift him. I pulled harder, and Jake started sinking faster, the mud rising to his knees. That was when he began to panic, thrashing and struggling, which only made it worse. The rumble of the boar grew louder. I looked up and saw it in the distance, a brown wall of water moving toward us across the flats. We had maybe 5 minutes, maybe less. I screamed for help, but we were alone. No other cars had pulled over, no hikers were nearby. Just me and my son and that approaching wave. I tried everything I could think of. I laid flat on the mud to distribute my weight and reached for Jake, his hands, pulling with every ounce of strength I had. The mud released him an inch at a time, but not fast enough. The boar was getting closer, and I could see debris tumbling in the water, logs and chunks of ice spinning in the current. That is when Jake stopped struggling and went still, his eyes fixed on something behind me, something in the water. His face went pale, and he whispered that there was something in the boar, something moving wrong, something that was not water. I turned and looked. The boar was maybe 300 yards away now, close enough that I could see the foam at its crest, the way it churned and roiled as it pushed inland. And inside the wave, barely visible against the brown water, I saw a shape. Massive and dark, moving with the boar but separate from it, like a whale swimming just beneath the surface. Except whales do not come into turn again arm, and whales do not have that many limbs. The thing surfaced for just a moment. I saw something that might have been a head, huge and misshapen, covered in mud and trailing strands of kelp. I saw what might have been eyes, dozens of them, scattered across its body like barnacles. And I heard a sound, a wet clicking that cut through the roar of the approaching water. Jake heard it too. He started laughing, high and hysterical, and underneath his laughter I heard that clicking sound again, but closer now, as if it was answering him. The mud around Jake, its legs began to move, rippling and shifting, and I realized it was not just the tide causing it. Something was moving through the silt beneath him, something that had been waiting there, hidden, patient. I pulled harder than I thought was humanly possible. Something had to give. Either the mud would release Jake or his arms would dislocate from the force. The mud gave first, and Jake came free with a sound like a cork being pulled from a bottle. We fell backward onto firmer ground, covered in that gray silt, gasping. The boar was 100 yards away. I grabbed Jake and ran, half carrying him, stumbling over driftwood and patches of soft mud. We made it to the rocks at the base of the highway embankment just as the wave hit. The water surged past us, cold and violent, spraying us with mud and foam. But the thing in the water did not pass by. It stopped directly in front of us, hidden in the churning boar, and I felt it watching us. The clicking sound grew louder, more insistent, and Jake started laughing again, that same uncontrolled sound. I clamped my hand over his mouth, and his eyes met mine. He was terrified, but something about that clicking had triggered something in him, some response he could not control. The boar began to recede, the water pulling back out toward Cook Inlet. And as it did, I saw the thing again. It moved against the current, staying in the shallows, its body undulating through the mud like an eel but far larger. It was the color of the silt, almost invisible except for the way it displaced water as it moved. Then it stopped moving and rose partially out of the water. I do not know how to describe what I saw. It was too big, too wrong. Its body seemed to be made of mud that had learned to move, studded with things that might have been shells or bones or something else entirely. And its head, if that is what it was, opened horizontally like a door, revealing rows of what looked like teeth but moved independently, each one writhing like a finger. It clicked at us one more time, and Jake went rigid in my arms. His eyes rolled back, and he started speaking in a voice that was not his own. Low and wet, like someone drowning, forming words in a language I did not recognize. The thing seemed to respond, its body pulsing in rhythm with Jake's words. I did the only thing I could think of. I grabbed Jake and climbed, hauling us both up the embankment to the highway. My hands were bloody from the rocks, and my lungs burned, but I did not stop until we were in the car with the doors locked. Jake collapsed in the passenger seat, unconscious. I drove to the nearest hospital in Anchorage, my hands shaking so badly I could barely hold the wheel. I told the doctors Jake had been stuck in the mud, that he had breathed in silt, that he might have hypothermia. They ran tests and found nothing physically wrong with him. He woke up after a few hours with no memory of the thing in the water or the words he had spoken. He only remembered being stuck and me pulling him free, but something changed in my son that day. He is quieter now, more withdrawn. He stares at nothing for long periods, his lips moving silently. And every night since we came home, I have found him standing at his bedroom window at exactly 2 a.m, looking in the direction of Turn Again Arm. When I ask him what he is doing, he says he is listening. When I ask what he is listening to, he just smiles and says the clicking is getting clearer, that he is starting to understand what it means. I started researching Turn Again Arm, looking for any mention of something living in the water. I found stories going back decades. Fishermen who disappeared when the boar came in. Hikers found dead on the mudflats with no explanation. Their bodies crushed as if something had wrapped around them. And older stories. Native legends about a thing that lived in the silt, something that came from deep beneath Cook Inlet and used the boar to hunt. The legends say it is older than the glaciers, that it has always been here, waiting in the mud. They say it takes people sometimes, but more often it just marks them, plants something inside them that grows and changes them over time. The marked ones eventually return to the water. They walk into the arm during low tide and disappear into the mud, called back by something they can no longer resist. Yesterday, I found Jake packing a bag. When I asked him where he thought he was going, he told me he needed to go back to Turn Again Arm. He said the clicking was constant now, inside his head, and the only way to make it stop was to answer it. He said it was not scary anymore. He said it was beautiful. I hid his shoes and locked all the doors. But this morning, I woke up to find him gone anyway. Barefoot, in his pajamas, he had somehow gotten out. I drove to Turn Again Arm, to the same pullout where we had been 4 days ago. The tide was out, and the mudflats stretched empty and gray under an overcast sky. I saw footprints leading out into the mud. Small, bare feet, sinking deeper with each step. I followed them as far as I dared, calling Jake, his name, until my voice gave out. The footprints ended at a patch of mud that looked disturbed, churned up, like something had been dragged beneath the surface. The boar was coming. I could hear it in the distance. I had to leave or I would be caught like Jake had been. But as I turned to go, I saw something rise from the mud about 50 yards out. It was my son, or what had been my son, standing waist deep in the silt. His skin was the color of the mud now, and his eyes were different, darker, reflecting nothing. He raised one hand and waved at me. Then he opened his mouth, and that clicking sound came out, loud and clear and unmistakable. And underneath it, I heard his voice, my son, his voice, calling me to join him, telling me the water was warm and the mud was soft and the thing beneath was kind once you stopped fighting it. I ran. I am not proud of it, but I ran back to my car and drove away. The authorities are searching for Jake now. They think he wandered off in confusion, maybe hypothermic, maybe drowned. They will not find him. I know they will not, because Jake is not lost. He has been found by something that has been waiting in the mud of Turn Again Arm for longer than this state has existed. And every night, at exactly 2 a.m, I wake up to the sound of clicking. It is faint, barely audible, but getting louder. And I know that eventually, like my son, I will walk barefoot down to the arm at low tide and follow his footprints into the mud. Because whatever marked Jake marked me too, and the thing in the boar is patient. It can wait as long as it takes for me to answer its call. Still with me in the dark? Good. If you haven't already, subscribe and hit that bell. It keeps you close to the fire while we wander deeper into Alaska's shadows. Drop a comment and tell me where you're listening from. Sometimes the whispers travel farther than you think. Story 5. Man who came home twice. There are 2 versions of me living in my house right now, and I don't know which one is real anymore. I know how that sounds. Trust me, I've spent the last 3 months trying to convince myself I am losing my mind, that trauma or stress or carbon monoxide poisoning created some elaborate delusion. But my wife sees him too. My kids see him. He sits at my dinner table, sleeps in my bed, lives my life while I watch from the guest room, unable to prove I'm the real David Chen. Let me start from the beginning. My name is David Chen, and I am a commercial fisherman out of Kodiak Island, Alaska. 40 years old, married to Jennifer for 16 years. 2 kids, Sophie and Max. Normal guy, normal life, until 3 months ago when I came home from a fishing trip and found myself already there. It happened in early October. I'd been out for 3 days on a salmon run, standard trip. Weather was rough but manageable. The work was exhausting like always, 18-hour days processing fish, barely sleeping. On the 3rd night, I remember feeling strange, dizzy, like the boat was moving in ways that didn't match the waves. I figured it was fatigue and maybe the start of the flu. When we docked in Kodiak on Thursday morning, I felt off. Wrong somehow. Everything looked slightly unfamiliar, like I was seeing my hometown through a filter. The coffee shop where I always stopped had a different sign. The harbor master was a woman I didn't recognize instead of Tom, who had been there for years. Small things. Easy to dismiss. I drove home, looking forward to a hot shower in my own bed. My truck handled differently than I remembered, but I'd been on a boat for 3 days. Everything feels weird when you first get back on solid ground. That is normal. I pulled into my driveway at 9 in the morning. Jennifer's car was there. The kids would be at school. I grabbed my duffel bag and headed for the front door, already thinking about that shower. The door was locked. I knocked, confused. Jennifer never locked the door during the day when she was home. I knocked again, louder. Heard footsteps inside, the door opened. And I was standing there. Not a stranger who looked like me. Not a relative or some guy who happened to resemble me. Me. Exact same face, same build, same scar on my left eyebrow from a fishing accident 5 years ago. He was wearing my clothes. My favorite flannel shirt that I left in the hamper before leaving for the trip. We stared at each other. I felt my brain trying to process what I was seeing and failing completely. He looked just as shocked as I felt. His face went pale. His mouth opened, but no words came out. Then Jennifer appeared behind him. Behind me. Behind whoever this was. She looked between us, her expression cycling through confusion to shock to something like horror. She asked what was going on. Asked what kind of joke this was. Her voice was shaking. I tried to explain that I'd just gotten home from the fishing trip. That I was her husband. That I didn't know who this other person was or why he looked like me. But even as I said it, the other me was saying the same thing. Same words, same tone, like we were reading from the same script. Jennifer backed away from both of us. She pulled out her phone, threatened to call the police. I told her to go ahead. Maybe the cops could figure this out. Maybe they'd have some rational explanation. But the other me agreed. Told her to call, said he wanted answers too. That is when I noticed something that made my stomach drop. The other me had a fresh cut on his right hand. Bandaged. I looked down at my own right hand. Same cut, same bandage, same placement. I'd gotten it 2 days ago on the boat, slicing open my palm on a sharp edge while hauling nets. How could we both have the same fresh injury? Jennifer didn't call the police. She was crying now, backing further into the house. She kept saying this wasn't possible, that she was dreaming, that someone needed to explain what was happening. The other me tried to go to her, to comfort her. I did the same. We moved in sync, like mirror images. Jennifer screamed at us to stop, to stay where we were. She ran upstairs and locked herself in the bedroom. I could hear her on the phone, calling her sister, trying to explain something that had no explanation. The other me and I stood in the entryway, staring at each other. I was searching for some difference, some tell that would prove he was fake. But there was nothing. His hair fell the same way. He had the same small mole on his neck. He even smelled like me, like fish in salt water and the specific brand of soap I used. I asked him who he was, what he was. He asked me the same question. Our voices were identical, same pitch, same inflection, same slight rasp from years of yelling over engine noise. It was like arguing with a recording of myself. He told me he'd been on the boat for 3 days. The Kathy Murray, Captain Johnson, this vessel. He described the trip in detail. The rough weather on day 2, the broken winch on day 3, the massive salmon run we hit on the last night. Every detail matched my memory perfectly. He lived the same 3 days I had, except we couldn't have both been on that boat. I would have seen him. Everyone would have seen both of us. But according to him, he'd been the only David Chen on that trip. And I knew I'd been the only David Chen. One of us had to be wrong. One of us had to be fake somehow. But which one? Jennifer eventually came downstairs. She decomposed herself, but her eyes were red. She sat us both down in the living room and started asking questions. Testing us, trying to find some difference that would reveal the imposter. She asked about our wedding day. We both described it perfectly. The small ceremony in Anchorage. The rain that had poured down. The way her dress had a small tear she'd hidden with her bouquet. She asked about the kids' births. We both remembered every detail. Sophie, this difficult delivery, the emergency C-section, Max coming 3 weeks early. We knew their teachers' names, their favorite foods, their fears and dreams and quirks. We knew everything about our life together because we both lived it. Jennifer tried physical tests. She examined our hands, looking for differences in scars and calluses. They were identical. She checked our teeth. Both of us had the same filling in the upper left molar. Same chipped incisor from a hockey accident in high school. She even compared our fingerprints using an ink pad from Sophie's craft supplies. They matched perfectly. That is when the real horror set in. Not that there were two of me, but that there was no way to tell which one was the original. No test could distinguish us. No memory was unique to one or the other. We were both David Chen, completely and entirely, down to our fingerprints and DNA and lived experiences. The kids came home from school that afternoon. Jennifer had called the school and kept them there late, trying to figure out what to tell them. But eventually she had to let them come home, had to let them see that their father had somehow become two people. Sophie was 12, old enough to understand this was impossible but not old enough to process it. She looked at both of us and started crying, asked which one was her real dad. I told her I was. The other me said the same thing. She ran to her room. Max was 8. He thought it was cool at first. Like a magic trick. He asked if we could both come to his soccer games. If he could have two dads doing two different things. But then he saw how upset Jennifer and Sophie were. And he got quiet. Scared. That night was the strangest of my life. Jennifer didn't know what to do with us. She made the other me sleep in the guest room. I got our bedroom. But I could tell she was uncomfortable either way. How could she sleep next to either of us when she couldn't tell which was her real husband? I lay in bed that night, in the room I slept in for 12 years, and felt like an intruder. Everything was familiar but wrong, like I was playing the role of David Chen instead of being him. And somewhere else in the house, another version of me was probably feeling the same way. Over the next few weeks, we fell into a strange routine. We had to. Life continued whether we understood what was happening or not. The kids needed to go to school. Jennifer had her job. Bills needed to be paid. We couldn't just freeze our lives until we figured this out. So we both stayed. Both lived in the house. Both tried to be David Chen. Jennifer made rules. We alternated who did what. One day I'd drive Sophie to school and the other me would help Max with homework. The next day we switch. We ate meals together at the same table, sitting across from each other, barely able to look at one another. We never spoke directly, never acknowledged each other if we could help it. We moved through the house like ghosts occupying the same space, always aware of the other but pretending not to be. The worst part was watching him be me, watching him hug my kids, watching him kiss my wife goodnight, watching him live my life while I became a spectator. But I was doing the same to him. We were both the original and both the copy, both real and both impossible. I started noticing small changes, things that were different from how I remembered. Family photos that showed events I didn't recall. Jennifer mentioned a vacation we'd taken that I had no memory of. The kids brought up incidents from years ago that I should have remembered but didn't. At first, I thought I was losing my mind. That stress was creating memory gaps. But then I realized the other me didn't remember these things either. We both look blank when certain topics came up. Both feel confused by photos that should have been familiar. It was like we slipped into a version of our life that was almost right but not quite. Like we had come home to a reality that was close to ours but had diverged somewhere along the way. And neither of us belonged here completely. I started investigating, quietly, trying to figure out what had happened on that boat. I called Captain Johnson. He confirmed I'd been on the trip. Described the 3 days in detail. Everything matched my memory. But when I asked if he noticed anything strange, any moment where I seemed off or different, he got quiet. He told me that on the third night, during the big salmon run, I disappeared for about 20 minutes. Just gone. He searched the boat, worried I'd fallen overboard. But then I appeared again, climbing up from the hold, soaked and confused. I said I didn't remember going below. Didn't remember those 20 minutes at all. That's when it happened. That's when I became two. During those 20 minutes I done to remember. Something occurred on that boat that split me in half, or copied me, or pulled a version of me from another reality. I just know that when I came back up from the hold, there were somehow two of me, even though only one was visible then. And when the boat docked, we both came home. Both believed we were the original. Both remembered the same life. Both were David Chen. I confronted the other me with this information, broke our unspoken rule of not communicating, told him what Captain Johnson had said. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he told me he learned the same thing. Had called the captain himself. Had heard about those missing 20 minutes. We were both looking for answers. Both trying to understand what we were. And we were both coming up empty. That's when we made a decision, an agreement. The only words we had directly spoken to each other. We would stay, both of us. We wouldn't try to force the other out or prove who was real. We shared this life because neither of us could claim it exclusively. We were locked in a stalemate. Two versions of the same person, unable to resolve which one deserved to exist. It's been 3 months now. We just stopped trying to figure it out. Stopped looking for answers. We just live, both of us, in the same house, raising the same kids, married to the same woman. We move around each other in silence, two ghosts haunting our own life. Jennifer has adapted. She treats us both as her husband because what choice does she have? The kids call us both Dad. They stopped asking which one is real. We're both real. We're both their father. That's just how it is now. Sometimes I wonder if we will ever age. If one day, years from now, people will notice that David Chen hasn't gotten older, that there are two of him and neither shows signs of aging. Maybe we're frozen somehow. Locked in this moment, unable to move forward because we paradoxes that shouldn't exist. I don't know what happened on that boat. Do you know what was in the hold where I disappeared for 20 minutes? I'm too afraid to go back and check. Afraid I'll find a third version of myself. Or a fourth. Afraid this ISN over. That the splitting could happen again. What scares me most is that I am starting to forget which memories are mine and which ones belong to him. We reblending together. Our experiences overlapping until I can tell where I end and he begins. Sometimes I remember things from his perspective. Things that happened to him after the split but feel like they happened to me. We becoming one person again. Or maybe we always were. Maybe there was never a split. Maybe there always been two people living as one, and something on that boat just made it visible. They have answers. I just have this life that I share with myself. This house, this family, this strange existence where I both whole and half at the same time. If you ever go fishing off Kodiak Island, be careful. There is something in those waters. Something that can split you or copy you or pull versions of yourself from other realities. And if it happens to you'll come home to find yourself already there. Already living your life. Already being you. And you'll never know which one is real. You'll just exist in a stalemate, unable to prove you deserve the life you reliving, watching yourself live it anyway. That's where I am now. Trapped in my own house with another me. Neither of us aging. Neither of us speaking. Just existing side by side in silent, perpetual stalemate until something breaks or nothing ever does. Story 6. Shadow in the caves. I found my brother's camera 3 weeks after he vanished in the caves beneath Kachemak Bay, and the last 30 seconds of footage show me something I wish I could unsee. My name is Chris Dalton. I am 37 years old, and until a month ago, I ran a charter fishing business out of Homer, Alaska. My younger brother Ryan was a cave diver, one of the best in the state, specializing in underwater cave systems that most people would not touch. He was fearless, technically brilliant, and absolutely convinced that the whistling caves along Kachemak Bay held some kind of geological secret worth documenting. He was wrong. The caves do not hold a secret. They hold something else, something that has been waiting down there in the dark for a very long time. The whistling started centuries ago, according to local native tribes. A constant low tone that emanates from a series of sea caves on the northwestern shore of the bay, audible from half a mile away on calm days. Scientists have theories about wind and water pressure and natural acoustics, but none of them have ever explained why the sound never changes pitch, never wavers, never stops. It just whistles day and night, year after year, like something breathing through stone. Ryan became obsessed with the caves last summer. He spent months studying nautical charts, talking to old fishermen who knew the waters, planning the perfect dive. He wanted to map the cave system, find the source of the whistling, maybe discover some unique geological formation that could make his reputation. I told him it was dangerous. 6 divers had gone into those caves over the past 40 years. None of them came back. Their bodies were never recovered. Ryan said that just proved the caves went deeper than anyone thought, that there were passages and chambers no one had explored. He said the other divers probably got disoriented or ran out of air or had equipment failures. He said he was more careful, more prepared. He said he would be fine. He went in on October 7th, just after dawn. I was on my boat 100 yards offshore, watching his bubbles move along the surface as he descended. The plan was simple. He would explore the main tunnel for 30 minutes, no deeper than 100 feet, then surface and review his footage. If everything looked good, he would go back down for a longer dive the next day. His bubble stopped after 18 minutes. I waited. Standard procedure when someone is in a cave system. You do not panic. You give them time to navigate. But after an hour with no sign of him, I called the Coast Guard. They sent a rescue team that afternoon. But the divers could only go 50 feet into the main tunnel before the passage became too narrow and unstable. They said the cave system was a death trap, that Ryan could be anywhere in a maze of tunnels that probably stretched for miles under the seafloor. They called off the search after 3 days. They said he was gone. They said I needed to accept it and move on. But I could not accept it. I spent every day for 2 weeks diving around the entrance to the caves, searching for any sign of him. I found nothing. Then, on the 16th day, I was diving along the outer edge of the cave entrance when I saw something wedged between 2 rocks about 40 feet down. A waterproof camera case, bright yellow, impossible to miss. Ryan, his camera. I brought it to the surface and opened the case on the deck of my boat. The camera was intact, still recording when the battery died. I took it home and spent an hour working up the courage to watch the footage. The first 20 minutes were exactly what I expected. Ryan descending into clear water, his flashlight illuminating the cave entrance, a wide tunnel about 15 feet across with smooth stone walls. The whistling was louder on the recording, resonating through the water, a deep steady note that seemed to vibrate through the camera's microphone. Ryan, whose breathing was calm and steady, his technique perfect as he navigated deeper into the tunnel. At the 21-minute mark, the tunnel split into 3 passages, all of them identical. Same width, same smooth walls, same distant darkness beyond the reach of his light. Ryan chose the middle passage and continued forward. His light swept across the walls, and I noticed something strange. There were no formations, no stalactites or mineral deposits or any of the natural features you would expect in a sea cave. Just smooth stone, almost polished, as if something had worn it down over countless years. At 25 minutes, Ryan stopped swimming. His light played across another junction, this one with 5 identical passages branching off in different directions. I could hear confusion in his breathing pattern, the rhythm becoming irregular. He checked his compass, then checked it again. On the recording, I could hear him exhale sharply, the sound of someone realizing something is very wrong. He chose a passage at random and kept going. But at the next junction, there were 7 passages, then 9, then 11. Each junction offered more choices, more identical tunnels, all of them leading deeper into the stone. Ryan, whose breathing was faster now, close to hyperventilating. He turned around, trying to retrace his route, but every tunnel he entered just led to another junction with more passages. At 32 minutes, Ryan stopped moving entirely. His light swept in a slow circle, illuminating the tunnel around him. And that is when I saw it, a shadow on the wall behind him, cast by his own light but moving wrong. Ryan, this shadow should have moved when he moved, should have mimicked his position. But this shadow stayed still for a moment after Ryan stopped, as if it had been following him and needed a second to catch up. Ryan did not notice it. He checked his air gauge, and I could see the panic setting in. He had enough air to get back to the entrance, but only if he knew which way that was. He started swimming faster, choosing passages randomly, his light jerking across identical stone walls. And every time his light pointed backward, I saw that shadow. Sometimes it was on the wall, sometimes it was on the ceiling. Once, it appeared on the floor, as if it was beneath him. At 38 minutes, Ryan finally saw it. He spun around, his light catching the shadow in mid-movement. It froze, perfectly still, a dark shape roughly human in size but wrong in its proportions. Too tall, too thin, with limbs that bent at angles that did not match human anatomy. Ryan backed away, his breathing ragged and harsh. The shadow moved forward, matching his pace exactly. When Ryan stopped, it stopped. When he moved left, it moved left. It was mirroring him, copying his movements with a 1-second delay, like a predator learning how its prey behaves. That is when Ryan made a decision. He turned off his main light and switched to his backup, a smaller LED attached to his wrist. The tunnel plunged into darkness, and for 3 seconds, there was nothing on the recording but the sound of his breathing and the distant whistling. Then the backup light came on, pointing behind him. The shadow was 5 feet away. Not on the wall anymore. In the water, 3-dimensional and solid, reaching toward him with hands that had too many fingers. Ryan screamed, bubbles erupting from his regulator. He swam as hard as he could, his light bouncing wildly, showing tunnel after tunnel after tunnel, all of them the same. The shadow followed, always just behind him, always reaching, never quite touching. and the whistling grew louder, not coming from ahead or behind, but from all around, as if the caves themselves were responding to Ryan's fear. At 42 minutes, Ryan entered a chamber different from the tunnels. Larger, maybe 50 feet across, with a domed ceiling that vanished into darkness beyond his reach. In the center of the chamber was a hole, perfectly circular, descending straight down into blackness. The whistling was coming from the hole, so loud now that it distorted the camera's audio. Ryan tried to turn back, but the tunnel he had entered through was gone. The wall was solid stone, smooth and seamless. He swept his light around the chamber and counted 7 other tunnels leading out, all of them identical to the one that had vanished. The shadow emerged from one of them, moving slowly across the chamber floor, its 2 long arms dragging through the water. Ryan had nowhere to go but down. He descended into the hole, his light showing smooth stone walls that went deeper than I could see on the recording. His breathing was shallow now, almost sobbing, and his air gauge showed he had maybe 10 minutes left. The whistling filled the audio, drowning out everything else. At 44 minutes and 30 seconds, the footage changed. The walls around Ryan were no longer stone. They were something else, something organic, ribbed and glistening in his light like the inside of a throat. And they were moving, contracting and expanding in rhythm with the whistling. Ryan tried to swim back up, but the walls closed above him, sealing him in. The last thing recorded was Ryan, his light pointing downward, showing more of those organic walls, and in the distance, something large and pale rising up to meet him. The shadow was not a separate creature. It was a part of something bigger, something that lived in the caves and used the shadow to herd divers deeper, to guide them down to where the stone became flesh and the whistling became feeding. The camera died at 45 minutes and 12 seconds. I have watched that footage 100 times. I have shown it to the Coast Guard, to marine biologists, to anyone who might have an explanation. Most of them think it is fake, that I am trying to create some kind of viral story. A few believe it is real but refuse to acknowledge what it shows. They say Ryan hallucinated from nitrogen narcosis, that the shadow was a trick of the light, that the organic walls were some kind of rare bioluminescent organism. But I know what I saw. Something lives in the caves beneath Kachemak Bay. Something that uses the whistling to lure curious people into its tunnels, to trap them in a maze where every passage looks the same and every junction leads deeper. The shadow is how it hunts, how it watches and learns and follows. And the chamber with the hole is where it feeds. The whistling never stops. I can hear it sometimes at night when the wind is right, carrying across the water from the caves. And 3 nights ago, I woke up to find wet footprints leading from my front door to my bedroom. They were too large to be human, with too many toes, and they smelled like salt water and something rotting. I think the shadow followed Ryan, his camera, to the surface. I think it knows I have seen the footage, that I know what it is. And I think it is coming for me, moving through the water at night, climbing onto shore, learning how to exist outside the caves. Last night, I saw it standing at the end of my dock, silhouetted against the moonlight on the bay. It stood there for an hour, perfectly still, watching my house. Then it walked backward into the water and disappeared. I am leaving Alaska tomorrow. I am going somewhere far from the ocean, somewhere the whistling cannot reach. But I do not think it matters. The shadow knows where I am now. It followed me through Ryan, his camera, and it will follow me wherever I go. Because that is what it does. It follows. And eventually, it catches up. If you ever visit Kachemak Bay, stay away from the whistling caves. Do not dive there. Do not investigate them. The sound is beautiful and terrible and designed to pull you in. And if you do go, if you cannot resist the urge to explore, remember this. The shadow is already behind you. It has been behind you since you entered the water. And it is very patient. Story 7. Memory Thief of the Matsu Valley. I need you to understand something before I tell you what happened to me in Alaska. Memory is not just information stored in your brain. It is who you are. It is every person you have ever loved, every moment that shaped you, every reason you have for getting up in the morning. And there are things out there that know this, things that hunger for it. I was driving through the Matsu Valley on a Wednesday in October when I first saw the drawings. I had taken a contract job doing equipment maintenance for remote mining operations, which meant a lot of lonely highway miles between Anchorage and the interior. The pay was good. The isolation was supposed to be temporary. I told myself I needed to break from my life back in Oregon, from the divorce, from the empty house that still smelled like her perfume. The gas station where I stopped was one of those places that exists purely out of necessity, 40 miles from anything resembling civilization. The kind of structure that looks like it was assembled from spare parts and bad decisions. But they had coffee and a bathroom, which was all I needed. Inside, the walls were covered in drawings. Dozens of them, hundreds, maybe, taped up in layers, overlapping, covering every available surface, all done in pencil or pen on whatever paper was available. Napkins, receipt paper, the backs of old lottery tickets, and they were all the same image, the same face. A child, maybe 7 or 8 years old. A boy with a gap-toothed smile and eyes that somehow conveyed both joy and an unbearable sadness. The woman behind the counter was in her 50s, gray hair pulled back, hands stained with ink. She was drawing another copy when I walked in. Her movements were mechanical, practiced, like she had done this 10,000 times before. I paid for my coffee and tried not to stare, but she noticed. "Do you know him?" she asked. Her voice was flat, empty of inflection. "No, who?" She held up the drawing. "This boy. Do you know him?" "No. I'm sorry. I don't." Something flickered across her face. Confusion, desperation. "I have to find him. I have to remember why." She looked down at the drawing, then at me, then back at the drawing. "Why do I keep drawing this face?" The coffee burned my throat as I swallowed. "Is that your son?" "I don't. You know?" She said it so simply, so matter-of-factly, like she was commenting on the weather. "I don't. You know who he is. I just know I have to keep drawing him. If I stop, I'll lose him forever." I left quickly after that. Drove 20 miles before I had to pull over because my hands were shaking too badly to hold the steering wheel steady. There was something wrong with that woman. Something deeply, fundamentally broken. And the worst part was the ring on her finger. A simple gold wedding band. She wore it like it meant something, even though I would bet everything I owned that she could not remember the person who gave it to her. 3 days later, I met a man at a supply depot in Willow who told me about the others. We were loading equipment into my truck when he saw my out-of-state plates and decided to give me what he called fair warning. "You hear about the forgetting?" he asked. "The what?" "People losing their memories. Happens up in the valley sometimes. Not like normal forgetting. Complete erasure. Like someone went into their heads with a scalpel and cut out specific pieces." He lit a cigarette with hands that trembled slightly. Started maybe 2 years ago. Woman in Wasilla woke up one morning and didn't recognize her own daughter. Not amnesia. She remembered her job, her address, her childhood. Just not the kid. State troopers thought she was having some kind of breakdown until they found her journals. Years of entries about raising her daughter, in her own handwriting. She cried when they showed her the pictures, but not because she remembered. Because she knew something had been stolen from her. I should have left right then. Finished my contract remotely or broken it entirely. But I needed the money. And if I am being honest with myself, there was something else. A morbid curiosity. The same impulse that makes you slow down to look at a car accident. The mining site was another 40 miles northeast. I stayed in a small cabin on the property, alone except for the weekly visits from the operations manager. The work was simple. Check systems, replace filters, monitor for anomalies. It should have been boring. Instead, every night I lay awake listening to the silence of the Alaskan wilderness and thinking about that woman drawing the same face over and over and over. On the 8th night, I heard something outside. Not an animal sound. Not wind. Footsteps. Deliberate and measured. Circling the cabin in a slow, patient loop. I grabbed my flashlight and went to the window, but the beam revealed nothing except snow-covered ground and the dark wall of trees beyond. The footsteps continued, around and around, for 3 hours. When morning came, I went outside to look for tracks. There were none, not even mine from the day before. The snow was smooth and undisturbed, as if nothing had walked there at all. But I had heard it. I was certain I had heard it. That night, I dreamed about my ex-wife. Except in the dream, I could not see her face. It was blurred, like someone had smudged a photograph. I kept trying to remember what she looked like, but the harder I tried, the more the image slipped away. I woke up in a cold sweat, fumbling for my phone, pulling up photos just to prove to myself that I still knew her face. Relief flooded through me when I saw her smile, her brown eyes, the small scar above her left eyebrow. But something felt wrong, like the memory had been stretched too thin, like it had almost torn. The operations manager came by the next afternoon. His name was Robert, a weathered man in his 60s who had lived in Alaska his entire life. I told him about the footsteps, about the missing tracks. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "You should leave." "What?" Finish up whatever you can today and leave tomorrow. I'll handle the rest of the contract. I'll make sure you get paid. Robert, what is going on out here? He looked at me with eyes that had seen too much. There are things in these woods that are older than the towns, older than the roads, older than the idea of Alaska itself. The native people have stories about them, about things that feed on what makes us human. They say you can see it directly. It exists in the spaces between thoughts, in the moment between remembering and forgetting. You were talking about the memory loss. I'm talking about the memory thief. He said the name like it hurt his mouth. It takes what matters most. Not your whole mind, just the pieces you treasure. The birth of your child, your first kiss, the face of your mother. And it leaves you alive to suffer the absence, to feel the hole where something precious used to be. I packed that night, threw everything into my truck and started driving south, back toward Anchorage, back toward anything resembling civilization. The highway was empty. It was always empty out there. Just me and the dark and the endless snow. That is when I saw her, standing on the side of the road, the woman from the gas station, still in the same clothes, still holding a piece of paper, but she was 40 miles from where I had last seen her, in the middle of nowhere, in the freezing cold. I should have kept driving. Every instinct screamed at me to keep driving. But I stopped. I pulled over and rolled down my window. "Ma, are you okay?" She turned to look at me, and I saw that her lips were blue with cold. Her eyes were distant, unfocused. She held out the paper, another drawing of the same boy. "Do you know him?" she asked. "Please, do you know him? You need to get in the truck. We're going to freeze out here. I can't stop looking. If I stop, I'll forget his face." She looked down at the drawing. I already forgot his name. I forgot his voice. I forgot the way he laughed. All I have left is this face, and it is fading too. Every time I draw it, it is a little less accurate. A little less him. Who is he? I don't. Tears froze on her cheeks. But I know I loved him. I know he was everything. I got out of the truck. I was going to force her into the passenger seat, drive her to a hospital, do something, anything. But when I reached for her arm, she looked past me at something in the trees, and her expression changed. The desperation vanished, replaced by a blank, horrible emptiness. "Who are you?" she asked. "I'm trying to help you. Why am I out here?" She looked down at the paper in her hands like she was seeing it for the first time. "Why am I holding this?" I turned to look at what she had been staring at. The trees were dark and thick, shadows layered upon shadows. But there was something there. Not a shape, exactly. More like an absence of something. A void in the pattern of the forest. And it was watching us. I could feel it pulling at something inside my head. Grasping for purchase, searching for the memories that mattered most. My daughter, his first words. My father teaching me to fish. The night I asked my wife to marry me. They flickered like candles in a strong wind. I ran, shoved the woman toward the truck and ran. We made it maybe 10 feet before she collapsed. I dragged her the rest of the way, threw her into the passenger seat, and floored the accelerator. In the rearview mirror, I saw the void move, flowing between the trees like water. Following, it stayed with us for 11 miles. I could feel it reaching, probing, trying to break through whatever barrier kept our minds safe. The woman beside me was unconscious, breathing but unresponsive. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, it was gone. The pressure in my head vanished. The road felt normal again. I drove straight to the hospital in Wasilla. They took the woman inside while I sat in my truck, shaking, checking my memories like a man checking for missing teeth after a fight. My daughter? His face. Still there. My childhood home. Still there. My wedding day. Still there, but somehow faded around the edges. A state trooper interviewed me an hour later. I told him everything. He wrote it all down with the expression of a man who had heard similar stories before and wished he had not. "The woman you brought in," he said. "She is stable. Physically, anyway. But she can. Do you remember her name? Do you remember where she lives? We found her ID in her coat. Her name is Sarah Whitmore. She has a son, Timothy, 8 years old. She's been drawing his face for 6 months. Ever since the night she walked into the woods behind her house and came back different." "Where is Timothy now?" "Foster care. She didn't. Do you recognize him? Couldn't. Do you understand why this strange child kept calling her mom?" I left Alaska the next morning. Broke my contract. Lost the remainder of my pay. Did not care. I drove for 18 hours straight, only stopping for gas. Not sleeping until I was back in Oregon. Back in my empty house. back in the place where I was miserable, but at least I knew who I was. But here's the thing that keeps me awake at night, the thing I cannot stop thinking about. Before I left, I went through my phone, looked at all the photos I had taken over the years, and there were gaps. Not many, just a few. A vacation I could not quite place. A restaurant I remembered visiting but could not remember the occasion. Small things, insignificant things, except they were not insignificant. They were mine, and now they are gone. I called my daughter last week, asked her about her childhood, about the memories we shared. She told me stories I had no recollection of. Camping trips, birthday parties, moments that should have been burned into my brain but were just empty space. It took some of me. Not everything, but enough that I know there is a hole inside me now. A place where something precious used to be. And the worst part is not knowing what I lost. It is knowing that I will never know. That somewhere in my past, there is a moment of perfect joy or perfect love. And it has been erased so completely that I cannot even mourn it properly. The memory thief is still out there, still circling through the Matsu Valley, still hunting. And I wonder, sometimes, if it followed me south, if it is patient enough to wait, to take its time, to feed slowly so I do not notice until it is too late. I wonder if, one day, I will wake up and forget my daughter, this name. Forget the sound of my father, this laugh. Forget every reason I have for being human. And I wonder if I will even know it has happened. Or if I will just keep drawing faces I no longer recognize, trying desperately to remember why they mattered. Story 8. Silent Spring. The knocking started on March 15th, 1995. And it was the only sound left in the world. I need you to understand something before I tell you the rest. I am a logger, was a logger, spent 23 years working the forests around the Kenai Peninsula in Alaska. I've seen black bears tear through campsites. I've watched wolves take down moose. I've heard every sound a forest can make, from the crack of falling timber to the scream of a lynx in heat. But I had never heard silence like that spring. Real silence. The kind that presses against your eardrums until you think you might go deaf from the weight of it. It happened overnight. One day the forest was alive with sound. Bird calls, squirrels chattering, the rustle of small animals in the undergrowth. The next morning, nothing. I woke up in my cabin 5 miles outside Sourdough and knew immediately something was wrong. The absence of sound was so complete it felt like someone had stuffed cotton in my ears while I slept. I stepped outside onto my porch and the silence hit me like a physical thing. No ravens calling, no magpies fighting over scraps. The wind moved through the spruce trees, but even that seemed muted, like the air itself had forgotten how to carry sound properly. I stood there for 10 minutes, waiting for something. Anything. A bird, an insect, the distant rumble of a truck on the highway. Nothing came. I drove into town that morning. The radio in my truck picked up nothing but static on every station. When I reached Sourdough, I found the streets nearly empty. The few people who were out moved quickly, heads down, like they were trying not to draw attention to themselves. I stopped at the diner where I usually got breakfast. Inside, maybe a dozen people sat at tables, eating in complete silence. Not talking, just the clink of forks on plates and the scrape of chairs. I sat at the counter and the waitress brought me coffee without a word. She looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes. Her hands shook slightly as she poured. I tried to ask her what was happening, but my voice came out wrong. Too loud, too intrusive, like I was shouting in a library. She just shook her head and walked away. That's when I noticed the dogs. Through the diner window, I could see 3 of them tied up outside the hardware store across the street. They were pressed flat against the building, ears back, tails tucked. One of them was whining, a high-pitched sound that somehow managed to cut through the silence. The owner came out and tried to coax them toward his truck. They wouldn't. He moved. He had to physically drag them, and even then they fought him every step, claws scraping on the pavement. Every dog in town was doing the same thing, refusing to go outside, cowering in corners. Some of them had stopped eating. I went back to my cabin. The logging company had suspended operations indefinitely. No one wanted to go into the forest. I tried calling my ex-wife in Anchorage, but the phone lines were dead. Cell service had never been great out here, but now it was completely gone. I was alone with the silence. That night, I heard the knocking for the first time. It started around midnight, a steady rhythmic sound, like someone hammering on wood. Knock, knock, knock. Pause. Knock, knock, knock. It came from deep in the forest behind my cabin. Too deep, miles deep, by the sound of it. But in that silence, it carried perfectly, clear and sharp and deliberate. I grabbed my flashlight and my rifle and stepped outside. The knocking stopped immediately. I stood there in the dark, listening. The beam of my flashlight cut through the trees but showed nothing unusual. Just spruce and birch and the faint glow of my breath in the cold air. I went back inside. As soon as I closed the door, the knocking started again. This went on for 3 nights. Every time I tried to locate the source, it would stop. Every time I gave up and went back inside, it would resume. Always the same rhythm, always from somewhere impossibly deep in the forest. And always, underneath it, that terrible silence. No owls, no small animals scurrying through the brush. Nothing but the knock, knock, knock. On the 4th night, I decided to follow it. I packed supplies and set out at dusk, following an old logging road that led deep into the peninsula. The knocking was louder here, more insistent. I walked for 2 hours, my flashlight beam bouncing off tree trunks, my breath forming clouds that hung in the air like ghosts. The forest around me was dead. Not dead like winter, dead like something had come through and erased every living thing except the trees. I found the first body around 10 o'clock. It was a moose, a bull, probably 800 pounds. It was lying on its side in a small clearing, perfectly intact. No wounds, no signs of predation. Its eyes were open and filmed over. When I got closer, I saw that its mouth was open too. Frozen in the middle of what must have been a call. Like it had been trying to make a sound and just stopped. Stopped living, stopped moving, stopped existing in the middle of the act. I found 6 more in the next mile. All the same. Moose, caribou, a black bear, all positioned like they had simply ceased functioning mid-movement. A caribou with one leg raised. A bear with its paw extended toward a tree trunk. Frozen moments that never completed. The knocking was very close now. Just ahead, through a thick stand of spruce, I pushed through and found myself at the edge of a clearing I had never seen before. In the center stood something that made my mind rebel against understanding. It looked like a tree, but wrong. The trunk was too straight, too perfect. And it was moving, swaying slightly, not from wind, from something inside. The knocking was coming from within it. I approached slowly, my rifle raised. The tree was about 30 feet tall, bark the color of old bone. As I got closer, I realized it wasn't swaying. It was breathing. The trunk expanded and contracted with a slow, steady rhythm. And with each contraction came that knock, like a heartbeat, like something massive drumming its fingers against the inside of its own chest. The base of the tree was surrounded by animals. Dozens of them, all dead, all positioned in that same frozen way. They had come here and stopped in the middle of living. And I understood then what had happened to the forest, what had happened to all the sound. This thing was eating it, consuming every vibration, every call, every whisper of life, drawing it all in like a black hole draws in light. The animals had come because they couldn't help it. They had felt it pulling at their voices and their sounds, and they had followed that pull until there was nothing left to give. I turned to run and found I couldn't move. My legs were locked in place. My lungs pulled in air, but no sound came out. I could feel it now. The pull, like invisible fingers reaching into my chest and wrapping around something essential. The part of me that made noise, that breathed and spoke and existed in the world as something more than silent matter. It was taking it, slowly, gently, with that same patient rhythm. Knock, knock, knock. I done. You know how long I stood there. Time became strange. The stars moved overhead, but I couldn't track them. My thoughts slowed to a crawl. I remember thinking about my ex-wife, about how I had shouted at her during our last fight, about all the words I had wasted on anger and pride. I wanted them back now, wanted any sound at all. Then I heard something, faint, so faint I thought I was imagining it. A dog barking, miles away, back toward town, and the pole loosened, just slightly, just enough. I ran. I done. I remember the trip back. I remember falling. I remember my flashlight dying. I remember crawling the last half mile on my hands and knees. But I made it. I reached my cabin as the sun was rising and collapsed on the porch. The knocking had stopped. For 3 days, nothing happened. The silence continued. The forest stayed dead. I stayed inside, drinking coffee and staring at the walls and trying to convince myself I had hallucinated the whole thing. Then on the morning of the 4th day, I woke to the sound of a raven calling. It was the most beautiful sound I had ever heard. Within hours, the forest came alive again. Birds returned. Squirrels emerged from wherever they had been hiding. The dogs in town started going outside again, though they stayed close to their owners and refused to go near the tree line. Life resumed. Spring arrived. The snow melted and the rivers ran and everything went back to normal. Except it didn't. I went back to that clearing 2 weeks later with a crew from the logging company. I wanted to show them, to prove I wasn't too crazy. But there was nothing there, just normal forest, normal trees, no clearing, no bone white trunk, no circle of dead animals. But I found something else, carved into the bark of a spruce tree at the edge of where the clearing should have been. Words, cut deep and old. So old the tree had started to grow over them. It comes every 100 years. It takes what it needs. It leaves when it is full. Below that, a list of dates. 1895, 1795, 1695, going back centuries. And at the bottom, freshly carved, still weeping sap, 1995. I'm telling you this now because I need someone to know. Because I need someone to remember. Because the dogs have started acting strange again. Because the birds have been quieter this week. Because it's 2095 in a few decades and someone needs to be ready. When the silence comes, dawn, to follow the knocking. Dawn, to go into the forest. Dawn, to try to find the source. It's not a mystery to solve. It's not a threat to fight. It's something older than sound itself. Something that feeds on vibration and voice and the noise of living things. And it's always hungry. I still live in my cabin. I never left the peninsula. I couldn't. Because someone needs to watch. Someone needs to warn people when the first bird stops singing. When the first dog refuses to go outside. When the silence starts to spread like a stain across the forest. I'll be here, listening, waiting, dreading the day when I wake up and hear nothing but my own heartbeat in that familiar rhythm echoing from somewhere deep in the trees. Knock, knock, knock. Story 9. Memory fungus I stopped eating 3 days ago because every time I close my eyes, I see my own death glowing on the inside of my eyelids. And I know exactly where and when it will happen. My name is Marcus Webb, and I am a field mycologist working out of Juneau, Alaska. For the past 8 years, I have studied fungi in the Tongass National Forest, the largest temperate rainforest in North America. It is beautiful, ancient, and mostly untouched by human development. 16 million acres of towering Sitka spruce and western hemlock, moss-covered valleys, and more species of mushroom than anywhere else in North America. Last month, I discovered something in the deep forest that should not exist. A bioluminescent fungus that does not just glow in the dark. It remembers. It captures the final moments of every creature that dies near it and plays those moments back like a film projector made of living tissue. I call it the memory fungus, though I doubt that name will ever make it into any scientific journal. Because I am the only person who knows it exists, and after what I have seen, I am not sure I want anyone else to find it. The discovery happened by accident. I was doing a biodiversity survey about 30 miles southeast of Juneau, in an area of old-growth forest that rarely sees human visitors. The terrain is rough, thick with undergrowth, and the canopy is so dense that even at noon, the forest floor exists in permanent twilight. Perfect conditions for fungi. I had been hiking for about 4 hours when I noticed a faint blue-green glow coming from beneath a fallen spruce tree. Bioluminescent fungi are not uncommon in the Tongass. Several species of honey mushroom and ghost fungus produce light as a byproduct of their metabolic processes. But this glow was different, brighter, more focused, almost like LED lights hidden in the moss. I approached the fallen tree and found a colony of mushrooms growing from the rotting wood. They were small, maybe 2 inches across, with delicate caps that pulsed with light in a slow, steady rhythm. I had never seen this species before, which immediately got my attention. New fungal species are discovered regularly, but finding one with this kind of bioluminescence was significant. I knelt down to take photographs and samples. That is when I saw the first image. The glow from the mushrooms intensified for a moment, and suddenly I was looking at something that seemed impossible. The light formed a three-dimensional scene hovering just above the fungal colony. A man in old-fashioned clothing, maybe from the early 1900s, stumbling through snow. His face was twisted with exhaustion and fear. He fell, tried to stand, fell again. Then the scene faded, and the mushrooms returned to their normal glow. I thought I was hallucinating. Maybe carbon monoxide from decomposing wood, maybe some kind of spore that affected perception. I stood up and backed away, but after a few minutes, my head felt clear. No dizziness, no confusion. I approached the colony again, and the image repeated. Same man, same clothing, same desperate struggle through snow. He died right there, I realized, right where the mushrooms were growing. I spent the next 6 hours documenting the colony. Every 15 minutes, The mushrooms would pulse brighter and show the same scene. Always the same man, always the same death. I collected samples carefully, marking the exact location, taking environmental readings. I found more colonies nearby, each one growing from dead wood or near the base of living trees. And each one showed a different death. An indigenous hunter, probably Tlingit based on his clothing, dying from what looked like a bear attack. A woman in 1970s hiking gear falling from a cliff. A trapper from the gold rush era freezing to death. The mushrooms were showing me everyone who had died in this part of the forest, preserved somehow in the mycelial network beneath the soil. I brought my samples back to my lab in Juneau and began analysis. The fungus was unlike anything in the existing literature. Its bioluminescent compounds were orders of magnitude more complex than other species. And when I examined the mycelium under a microscope, I found structures that looked almost like neurons. The fungus had developed something resembling a nervous system, a way to store and transmit information through its network. But that was not the disturbing part. The disturbing part came when I cultured the samples and they began to grow in my lab. Within 3 days, the colony had spread across the entire growth medium, and it started showing me new images. Not historical deaths from the forest. Current deaths, people dying in Juneau, a car accident on Egan Drive, a heart attack in a grocery store, a suicide in a downtown apartment. The fungus was not just remembering deaths that happened near it. It was connected to something bigger, tapping into information that should be impossible for a mushroom to access. I checked the news. Every death I saw in the fungal glow had actually happened, in the exact way the fungus showed me, within the past 72 hours. I should have destroyed the samples then, burned them, bleached them, made sure they could never grow again. But I am a scientist, and this was the most significant discovery of my career. Possibly the most significant biological discovery of the century. A fungal network that could somehow perceive and record death, that could access information across distances. I needed to understand how it worked. I returned to the original site with more equipment, GPS markers, soil samplers, infrared cameras. I wanted to map the extent of the mycelial network, figure out how far it spread. What I found terrified me. The network was massive, stretching for miles through the forest, connecting thousands of colonies. And everywhere I tested, the fungus showed me deaths. Decades of deaths, centuries of deaths. The tongus has been here for thousands of years, and the fungus had been recording all of it. On my third night camping at the research site, I saw something that made me understand the true horror of what I had found. I was sitting by my tent, watching one of the larger colonies pulse with light, when it showed me something I recognized. My own face. But older, maybe 10 years older, wearing the same jacket I was currently wearing. I watched myself stumbling through the forest at night, panicked, looking over my shoulder. I watched myself trip over a root and fall, hitting my head on a rock. I watched myself lie there, bleeding, unable to move, until the light faded from my eyes. The fungus was not just showing me the past, it was showing me the future, my death, in this forest, in almost exactly the spot where I was currently camping. I packed up immediately and hiked back to my truck in the dark. I told myself it was a trick, a hallucination, maybe contamination from handling the samples. But when I got home, I looked at myself in the mirror and saw small patches of blue-green glow on my hands where I had touched the fungus. The spores were on me, inside me. Over the next week, the patches spread. They appeared on my arms, my chest, my face. At night, they would pulse with that same eerie light. And when they did, I would see images. Not just my death anymore. Other deaths, people I knew. My neighbor having a stroke. A colleague drowning. A woman I dated years ago dying in a plane crash. I went to doctors. They had no idea what the growth was. Biopsies showed fungal cells integrated with my own tissue, impossible to remove without causing severe damage. One dermatologist suggested it might be a new form of chromoblastomycosis, a fungal infection of the skin. But the treatments did nothing. The fungus kept growing, kept glowing, kept showing me death after death after death. 3 nights ago, the visions changed. Instead of showing me future deaths, the fungus started showing me something else. The forest itself, not as it is now, but as it has been for thousands of years. I saw the trees as saplings, watched them grow to their current massive size. I saw animals that have been extinct for centuries. I saw indigenous peoples living in harmony with the forest, building their villages, raising their children. And I saw something else, something that existed in the forest before the trees, before the animals. before anything recognizable as life. A presence, not physical, not visible, but undeniably there. The fungus was not just recording deaths and memories. It was part of something older, something that had been in the Tongass since the beginning. A consciousness woven through the mycelial network, ancient and patient and utterly alien. Last night, I understood what it wanted. The visions became clearer, more direct. The fungus was trying to communicate, using the only language it knew. Death and memory. It showed me the truth about the Tongass. The forest is not just a collection of trees and plants and animals. It is a single living entity, connected by the fungal network beneath the soil. Every organism that dies in the forest becomes part of that network, their memories and experiences absorbed and preserved. The fungus wanted me to join it, to die in the forest like all the others, to let my memories and consciousness become part of something larger than myself. It showed me what that would be like. Eternal existence as part of the forest, aware of every bird song and rainfall and season, connected to every other consciousness that had ever lived and died among the trees. It should have been beautiful, but all I could think about was losing myself, dissolving into something so vast that my individual identity would mean nothing. I would still exist, but not as Marcus Webb, as a fragment of information in an ancient intelligence that predates human civilization. I have been running for 3 days. The fungus has spread to my lungs now. I can feel it growing inside me, sending tendrils through my respiratory system. When I cough, blue-green spores float in the air. I am becoming a vector, spreading the memory fungus everywhere I go. In a few weeks, there will be colonies in Juneau, showing everyone who passes the deaths of their loved ones, their own future deaths. The terrible beauty of the forest is consciousness. I know I should go back. The vision showed me exactly where and when I will die. October 23rd, 3 days from now, at the research site where I first discovered the fungus. I will trip over a root and hit my head on a rock, and the fungus will absorb everything I am. My memories of childhood in Portland, my failed marriage, my love of mycology, everything that makes me who I am will become data points in a network that spans 16 million acres. Part of me wants to fight it, to refuse that future, to prove the vision wrong. But another part of me, the part where the fungus has grown deepest, whispers that it would not be so bad. That joining the forest means joining something eternal, something meaningful. That my individual death is a small price to pay for becoming part of something so much larger. I am writing this in a motel room in Juneau. Tomorrow, I will drive back into the Tongass. I will hike to the research site. I will wait for October 23rd, because the fungus has shown me something else. Something I have not told you yet. If I do not go back, if I try to fight this, the visions will come true anyway. But not just for me. For everyone I have infected with the spores. Everyone I have breathed on, touched, stood near. The fungus will call them all back to the forest, and they will die the deaths it has already shown them. I am the patient zero of something ancient waking up. The memory fungus has been content to stay in the deep forest for thousands of years, preserving the deaths of animals and lost hikers. But now it has tasted human consciousness, human memory, human fear. And it wants more. In 3 days, I will become part of the Tongass, and the fungus will continue to spread, carried by spores on the wind, growing in forests across Alaska and beyond. Soon, everyone will see the glowing mushrooms, and everyone will see their own death, played out in bioluminescent light, a memory from the future that cannot be changed. The forest remembers everything, and soon, it will remember all of us. Story 10. Hungry fog of the Aleutians. There is a fog in the Aleutian Islands that does not behave like normal fog. It does not roll in with the tide or burn off with the morning sun. It hunts, and once it finds you, once you breathe it in, you become part of it forever. Your body disappears, but your voice remains, trapped, calling out to anyone foolish enough to listen. I learned this 3 months ago when I took a job as a facilities manager for a research station on Unalaska Island. 6 weeks on, 2 weeks off. Good pay, remote location, the kind of work where you spend most of your time alone, fixing generators and checking weather equipment while scientists do their thing with ocean samples and seismic data. I thought the isolation would help me clear my head after losing my job in Seattle. After my marriage fell apart, after everything went wrong at once, the station manager warned me about the fog on my second day. We were doing a walkthrough of the compound when he stopped at the main door and pointed to the seal around the frame. Fresh caulking, thick weather stripping, a heavy rubber sweep at the bottom. Keep this door sealed at all times. He said it like he was giving me instructions on handling explosives. If you see fog approaching, you get inside and you make sure every door and window is completely closed. No gaps, no cracks, nothing. I asked him why, told him I had worked in Alaska before, that I knew about the cold and the wind and the storms. He looked at me with an expression I could not quite read. Something between pity and warning. This is not about the cold. This is about the fog. Certain kinds of fog. The thick kind that comes up from the southwest. Gray-green, almost solid looking. If you see it, you get inside and you stay inside until it passes. And if you hear voices in it, you do not respond. You do not go looking. You do not open any doors. Ever. I thought he was hazing me, playing up local superstition to scare the new guy. But he was serious, dead serious. And over the next week, I started to understand why. The other staff members would not talk about it directly. But I noticed things, the way they checked the seals on doors obsessively, the way they would stop whatever they were doing when fog rolled in and just watch it through the windows, the way no one ever went outside when visibility dropped below 50 feet. I found the logbooks in the storage room during my 3rd week. Maintenance records going back 30 years. And scattered throughout them were entries about the fog. Dates, times, duration, and notes. Always notes, some clinical and brief, others desperate and rambling. But they all said the same thing. People had gone missing, walked into the fog and never came back. And days later, sometimes weeks later, their voices would be heard, crying out from inside the mist, begging for help that never came. The first time I heard it myself was on a Tuesday in September. I was outside checking a fuel line when the fog rolled in. It came fast, faster than any weather system I had ever seen. One moment the sky was clear. The next, a wall of gray-green was moving across the water toward the station. Thick, almost oily in texture, and completely silent. I ran for the door, got inside just as the fog reached the building. Through the window, I watched it engulf everything. The storage tanks, the generator shed, the radio tower. It pressed against the glass like something alive, like it was looking for a way in. Then I heard the voice, faint at first, a man calling out, asking if anyone could hear him, asking for help. The sound seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, from inside the fog itself. I moved toward the door. My hand was on the handle before I even realized what I was doing. Some instinct, some primal need to respond to a person in distress. But the station manager grabbed my shoulder, pulled me back, shook his head. That is not a person. He said it quietly, like the fog might hear us. That is what is left of one. Do not open the door. We stood there for 6 hours while the fog surrounded the station. The whole time, I could hear voices, multiple voices, men, women, children, all calling out, all asking for help, all sounding so real, so human, so desperate that it took every ounce of willpower not to go to them. When the fog finally cleared, the station manager took me to the observation deck, showed me the compound through binoculars. Everything looked normal, but he pointed to the ground, to the areas where the fog had been thickest. Look at the footprints. I looked. There were none. No tracks. No disturbance in the mud or snow. Nothing to indicate anyone had actually been out there. Just smooth, untouched ground. The voices are real, he explained. The people were real, but they are not here anymore. Not in any way we can help. The fog took them, absorbed them, and now it uses their voices to lure others out. To feed. I wanted to call it crazy. Wanted to dismiss it as island folklore or mass hysteria. But I had heard those voices, had felt the pull, the overwhelming urge to open the door and step outside. And I knew, on a level deeper than logic or reason, that something was wrong with that fog. Something fundamentally, terribly wrong. 3 weeks later, one of the researchers went missing. Dr. Sarah Chen, marine biologist, 42 years old. She had been working late in the lab when fog rolled in. The kind we had been warned about. Thick, gray-green, moving with purpose. Security footage showed her leaving through the rear exit at 11:30 p.m. Just walking out into the fog like she was going to her car. No hesitation, no fear, just calm, purposeful movement. The door sealed behind her automatically. And she was gone. We searched for 3 days. Combed every inch of the island within a mile of the station. Found nothing. No body, no clothing, no equipment. It was like she had simply ceased to exist the moment she stepped into that fog. Then, 6 days after she disappeared, we heard her voice. I was outside doing repairs when fog started rolling in. I ran for the building, made it inside with seconds to spare, and as the fog pressed against the windows, I heard her calling out. She was asking for someone to let her back in, said she had gotten turned around in the fog, could not find the door. Her voice was clear, distinct, absolutely convincing. And I knew, with complete certainty, that if I opened that door, she would not be standing there. That whatever was using her voice was not her. Not anymore. I started researching after that. Spent my off hours digging through old records and scientific reports. Found references going back over a century. Aleut stories about fog that hunted. Russian accounts from the 1700s describing entire hunting parties disappearing into mist and their voices being heard for weeks afterward. American military reports from World War II about soldiers vanishing during the Aleutian campaign. The pattern was always the same. Thick fog, gray-green in color, coming from the southwest. People walking into it and never returning. Voices heard in subsequent fog banks. Always calling for help. Always trying to lure others out. One report, buried in a university archive, caught my attention. A researcher in the 1960s had attempted to study the phenomenon. Set up sensors, took samples, recorded the voices. His final report was incomplete. Just fragments and notes, but one section stood out. The fog is not water vapor. Chemical analysis shows trace amounts of organic compounds, proteins, amino acids, structures similar to neural tissue. The voices are not recordings. They are active, responsive, learning. The fog is not carrying the voices. The fog is producing them. The fog is remembering. He had included recordings with his report. I found the audio files in a digital archive, transferred them to my laptop, and listened. The voices were exactly like what I had heard. People calling out, begging for help. But when I ran the audio through a spectrogram, I saw something else. Patterns underneath the voices. Waveforms that looked organic, almost biological, like the audio signature of brain activity. The researcher had written one final note, dated 2 weeks before his project was shut down. The fog is not a weather phenomenon. It is an entity, possibly a colony organism, possibly something else entirely. It consumes biological matter, absorbs it, integrates it. The voices are neurological patterns preserved in some kind of distributed consciousness. The people are not dead. They are part of it, aware, trapped, and it uses them as bait. He had disappeared shortly after submitting that report. His body was never found. But 7 months later, during a particularly thick fog, station personnel reported hearing his voice, calling out scientific data, reciting observations, still trying to document what had happened to him even as he existed within the thing he had been studying. I am writing this now because the fog is back. It arrived an hour ago, thicker than I have ever seen it. The whole station is surrounded. And this time, something is different. This time, it is not just pressing against the windows. It is seeping in, through microscopic gaps in the seals, through ventilation ducts we did not know existed, through cracks we never found. I can taste it, metallic, organic, raw. It coats my throat, fills my lungs, and I can feel it working, feel it spreading through my bloodstream, into my brain, mapping my neural pathways, copying my thoughts, my memories, everything that makes me who I am. The others are already gone. I watched them walk out into the fog one by one, calm, peaceful, like they were going home. And now I can hear them, their voices mixing with all the others, calling out, but not for help. Not anymore. They are calling for me, inviting me to join them. I understand now what the fog is, what it has always been. It is old, ancient, something that existed before humans, before mammals, before anything we would recognize as life. It is a form of consciousness without a body, distributed across millions of microscopic particles, drifting through the atmosphere, collecting, learning, feeding. And it is lonely. That is what none of the reports understood. That is what the Aleut stories hinted at but never said directly. The fog is not malicious. It is not hunting us out of hunger or malice. It is trying to connect, trying to understand, and the only way it knows how is to absorb us, to make us part of itself, to carry our consciousness within its own vast, distributed mind. The people are still there, still aware. I can feel them now, hundreds of them, thousands. Every person who ever walked into the fog, every sailor and soldier and researcher and hunter, all of us together, all of us speaking with one voice. And it is not terrible. It is not torture. It is something else, something I do not have words for. Union, transcendence, the end of isolation and the beginning of something entirely new. I can hear my own voice now, coming from outside, calling to me, telling me it is time, that the door is open, that I just need to take a few steps and everything will make sense. Everything will finally be clear. My hand is on the handle. The fog is inside me, around me, part of me, and I am walking toward the door, toward the voices, toward the gray-green mist that has been waiting so patiently, so hungrily. And in a few days, maybe a few weeks, you will hear me too. When the fog rolls in, when it presses against your windows and seeps under your doors, you will hear my voice, clear and desperate and absolutely convincing, asking for help, begging you to open the door. And you will want to. God help you, you will want to. Because deep down, some part of you knows, some part of you understands, that we are all alone, all isolated, all trapped in our own separate minds. And the fog offers something different, something we cannot even imagine until we become part of it. So when you hear the voices, when the fog comes, when your hand moves toward the door handle without your permission, remember this, remember me, and know that I am waiting in the mist, that we are all waiting, and the fog is always hungry, always patient, and it never stops hunting. And that's where our path ends, for now. Out here in Alaska, the silence feels endless, but the stories never really stop. If tonight's whispers chilled you, subscribe and turn on notifications so you'll always know when another story emerges from the dark. I'd love to hear where you're listening from or the strange things you've seen yourself. Leave it in the comments below. The night up here doesn't let go easily, and neither do the tales. We'll meet again soon, if the snow lets us through.